Good afternoon to everybody. I'm very pleased to see that we have participants from all the continents, which shows that the subject is indeed very interesting in all the parts of the world. I must apologize because my voice is not perfect today, so there may be some problems which do not lie entirely with the voice quality of the internet, but with my own voice. And I'll be very glad to discuss with you any points of interest. The purpose of the presentation of the introduction is to give you an overview of smart metering in Europe. That means within the legal and regulatory framework in Europe, and we know that many of the issues are common to other parts of the world, and many of the questions we may discuss are not specifically European questions. On the other hand, some particular aspects will indeed be related to the situation in Europe. So after a short introduction, I would like to say a few words about the policy changes we have observed in the domain of smart metering, and what are the regulatory challenges in order to facilitate the introduction of smart metering. A brief overview and some considerations about costs and benefits of smart metering, and then some ideas about new business opportunities created by the new technologies and new services, and finally some recommendations. As Hans has already said, there is a paper which was published by the Florence School of Regulation last year, where you can find more details and more data. So today I'm not bringing tables and graphics and figures, but you can find all of them in the paper, which is available on the internet on the website of the Florence School of Regulation. And indeed, I'm very pleased also to start this cooperation between the Florence School of Regulation and Leonardo Energy, and I would like to thank Leonardo Energy and Hans in particular for promoting this seminar today. Our first point is that smart metering is indeed a crucial factor for two things. On the one hand, for the efficient functioning of the European internal electricity market. You know that we have the ambition in Europe to create one single electricity market involving all the 27 member states of the European Union and serving about 500 million people. That's the largest integrated electricity market in the world. We have been improving the legal and regulatory framework since the early 1990s, but in order to have well-functioning wholesale and retail markets, we need to modernize our systems, and smart metering is an essential, crucial part of that effort. Smart metering is also essential to achieve the policy goals which have been approved by the European Union related to climate and energy policy, and in particular as regards three things: energy efficiency, the high penetration of renewable energy, and security of supply. Smart metering is not something specific to energy. It's indeed part of a global trend towards the digital economy and the information society. And in fact, the electricity industry and the energy industry in general are not very fast in adopting these new technologies, information and communication technologies, and modernizing, digitalizing the industry. Smart metering is not only about remote meter reading. Sometimes we see examples and references to experiments or projects where the main purpose is to replace the workforce doing the meter reading by remote automatic meter reading. But smart metering is much more than that. In fact, smart metering is part of a more complex puzzle, and smart meters have to interact with other smart things, as we say nowadays. On the one hand, with the grids, because the consumers are connected through networks, and the adoption of new information and communication technologies will also mean a significant change in the way we plan and operate our networks, our electricity networks. And then we have also the buildings, what happens behind the meter, so that if we want to maximize the benefits of the new technologies, we must keep in mind that these three pieces, the buildings, the meters, and the grids, must go together, and we should design and implement the technical solutions in such a way that we ensure that this potential can be achieved and maximized. To give you some figures from a study which was published last year and which was sponsored by the telecommunications industry, this is a global world study assessing the potential benefits of the introduction of new information and communication technologies in other sectors in terms of reduction of CO2 emissions. And the conclusion of this study was that worldwide the new technologies could achieve a reduction of 15% of CO2 emissions as compared to the business as usual scenario by 2020. And if we look now at the figures in some more detail, you can see that the main savings in terms of reduction of CO2 emissions come from smart grids and smart buildings. And the smart meters are, as I said before, an essential, crucial element to enable us to tap the potential in smart grids and smart buildings. Therefore, it is a very important piece of this game. Well, the smart meter can, on the one hand, can collect information from the customer appliances, but also from the local microgeneration, and transmit this information to the customer and to the supplier or to the distribution network operator or to the metering companies. Now, the energy landscape is changing, as we all know. More and more we see local microgeneration, and we see consumers becoming also producers. That's the new word which was invented, the prosumer, to emphasize this double nature of the modern consumer who is also a producer. And it's important to optimize the use of these distributed generating resources. And again, smart metering can play a very important role. Another aspect which may change the landscape very soon, at least in some countries, is plug-in vehicles, and this will again create the need for a different type of interaction between the consumer and the grid. So the first part of the metering is to collect information and to provide information, accurate, real-time information to customers and suppliers, distribution network operators. But the intelligent meters also allow the customers or the suppliers on their behalf to interact with the appliances. If we have this possibility of control of bidirectional flows of information, then we can achieve a lot in terms of optimization and improving energy efficiency, both at the consumer end user level and at the system and network level. And I think it's important to stress that if we want to fully exploit the benefits of smart metering, we must realize that its potential is disruptive. It implies a very deep change in the functioning of the networks and of the energy markets. And therefore we need to reframe the networks and the markets to redesign operational and market and planning processes to take into account the new available information and the new demand control, demand response possibilities. Very often we see that people consider that the networks and the markets should not change, that they are as they should be, and smart metering is then viewed as something which should or must be added to the existing markets and to the existing networks, and then the objective becomes to minimize the cost of introduction of this new technology. But this is a very short-sighted view, I would say. That's not the way to look at smart metering. It's not the way to maximize the potential benefits. Now let's talk a little bit about policy changes. Some of you may have seen at the end of January this year an editorial in the Financial Times about smart grids and smart metering. And it's indeed astonishing that a business newspaper, the most influential European business newspaper, dedicates an editorial to such a technical issue. And this was not imaginable just a couple of years ago. Nevertheless, back in 2003, the International Energy Agency had already stated that it would be appropriate to move to metering systems that can enable much greater real-time information for demand response and other end-use energy services. So the recommendation to adopt a new policy has been there for several years. And the European electricity industry, represented by Eurelectric, in the same year, 2003, also stated that the issue of metering, however invisible in the general debate, is of paramount importance for the customer, the supplier, and the distributor. This awareness of the importance of smart metering has been there for a certain time, but it's only now that it is surfacing in the public debate, in the newspapers, in the general discussion. When we look at these changes, we may identify several drivers, several factors that explain this change. On the first, liberalization of energy markets, and in particular the fact that since July 2007, all energy consumers in Europe are free to choose their supplier from any member state. The regulatory frameworks have been designed in such a way that this retail competition can take place, and smart metering can play and will play a very important role in the liberalization of energy markets. Then, second factor, we have technology developments, and in particular related to ICT, and not only in substantial improvements in performance, but also impressive reductions in price, which makes the mass deployment of these technologies feasible. Then we have the fact that electricity prices and energy prices in general increased substantially over the last years, and therefore more and more consumers are worried about their electricity bills and are interested in reducing their electricity bills. And last but not least, we have new policies, namely climate change policies in many parts of the world, and particularly in Europe, and commitments to reduce CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. And this again implies to look at practical ways of achieving these reductions, and smart meters are an important part of this effort. Now this is rather European part of my presentation. I wanted just to mention the most relevant legislative initiatives and documents related to smart metering. There are two basic directives, two basic documents which directly relate to metering. We have a metering directive, as the name says, it is focused on metering, and it was adopted in 2004. And then in 2006 we had another directive, the so-called Energy Services Directive, which is concerned with energy and use efficiency and energy services in general. And this 2006 directive states that account should be taken of efficiency gains obtained through the widespread use of cost-effective technological innovations, for instance, electronic metering. In 2006, following approval of the Energy Services Directive, the European Commission published an action plan for energy efficiency, and among other things, the Commission announced that they would propose a more detailed metering and billing requirements in 2009, and the Commission is now working on these more detailed metering and billing requirements. This document also recalled that the largest cost-effective savings potential lies in the residential and commercial building sector, where the full potential is now estimated to be around 30% of energy use. So to get the benefits of energy efficiency gains in the residential and commercial and services sectors, we need new technologies. The directive, the Energy Services Directive, should have been transposed into national law by all 27 member states by May 2008, but unfortunately most of the member states have not yet transposed this directive properly, and that's the reason why in January of 2009 the European Commission sent what is called the reasoned opinions to 20 member states. That's the first step in the process of bringing member states before the European Court of Justice for not complying with EU legislation. And it's very unfortunate that governments are not very efficient in implementing the Energy Efficiency Directive. At the end, in 2008, the European Commission made the first assessments of the application of the directive in the member states and of the national energy efficiency action plans. And in this assessment, in January 2008, the Commission recognized that it would be useful to have clear price signals, tariffs encouraging energy efficiency, and better feedback on actual consumption through improved billing and smart meters. So finally the expression smart meters appears in Commission's documents. But at the end of 2008, in November, the Commission reassessed the way member states were dealing with the national action plans, and came to the conclusion that unfortunately there is a gap between the member states' political commitment and their actions, and the measures already adopted at the end of 2008 by the member states should achieve energy savings of about 13% by 2020, which is well below the 20% target which was agreed by all the governments and by the European Parliament. Now, another directive from 2005 on security of electricity supply also mentions metering systems, and states that member states should encourage the adoption of real-time demand management technologies such as advanced metering systems. Finally, the European Commission in 2007 presented new proposals for the European electricity and gas market, the so-called third energy liberalization package. And in these proposals, in the electricity directive, there is a reference to metering and the need to make more information available and to facilitate consumer switching of supplier, to facilitate switching from one supplier to another supplier. This directive is now being discussed, or this proposal is now being discussed at the final stage of discussions, in fact, between the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament. We don't know yet what the outcome will be, but what we know is that demand response and smart metering have been one of the points of disagreement between the European Parliament and the Council. The Parliament much in favor of setting mandatory rollout of smart meters, mandatory measures related to smart grids and to demand response, and the Council not very happy with those proposals and rejecting the Parliament's proposal. So we will see what will happen at the end of the day. For the moment, it's not clear what will be, which language will be in the electricity directive. If this directive is approved before June, what will be there related to smart metering. As you have seen, there are not so many references in the European legislation to smart metering, and they are basically recommendations and suggestions, not mandatory, clear policies. So we need, I believe, first to properly implement the existing legislation and accelerate implementation of the Energy Services Directive in particular. But we need also policies on demand response and smart metering that are not yet in legislation. And demand response is absolutely necessary, not only to boost retail competition and to improve the competitiveness and the efficiency of the European energy markets, but also to improve the penetration of renewable energy. And as you know, by 2020, 20% of total energy consumption in the EU must come from renewable sources, which means about 35% of electricity generation coming from renewable sources. To do this in an efficient, cost-effective way, we must adapt the grids and have effective demand response measures in place. So this is missing. We will see whether something will appear in the new directive now being discussed, or whether decisions on these two policies will be postponed. Now let's talk a little bit about the regulatory challenges. Regulators and legislators usually take actions that may be divided into three categories. Measures to enable or mandate the introduction of smart meters, specific metering related regulation, and finally other forms of regulation which have an impact on smart metering. We have seen different approaches, for instance, just removing any legal or regulatory barriers to smart metering, thus enabling but not mandating smart metering. Other countries have established that monthly electricity bills must be based on measured data, So they do not impose, they do not mandate the introduction of smart metering, but indirectly through this requirement, they lead to smart meters. Other countries explicitly mandated the introduction of smart metering and established financial incentives or compensation for the concerned undertakings. And finally, other countries have mandated the introduction of smart metering without any considerations about financial incentives or compensation. In some cases, we have seen incentives for rollout, disincentivizing installation of the old electromechanical meters, co-funding of operational expenses, and other schemes of financial incentives. While in other countries we have seen, as I already said, no distinction between smart meters and metering in general. Now, some specific regulatory concerns. First one is network tariffs, because in many countries, low voltage customers pay flat network tariffs, and this reduces the margin for efficiency improvements. The more efficient suppliers, those who would propose new contracts to the customers, they have difficulty in passing to the customer a substantial amount of the benefits, because, as you know, at low voltage level, where most residential and services customers are located, about 50% of the electricity bill is related to networks. And if the network tariffs are flat, are not time dependent, then there is no benefit if the customer going to the customer if the customer is using the infrastructure during off-peak hours, for instance. In other countries, network operator revenues increase with electricity consumption. So network operators have an incentive to increase electricity consumption, not an incentive to promote the efficient use of electricity. And therefore, these network companies have no reason to support demand-side management or demand response. But regulation can solve the problem by decoupling the network revenues from electricity consumption. Load profiling was very useful to start retail competition in the domestic market, in the households market, but now it is an obstacle to the introduction of more advanced pricing formula, because like flat network tariffs, load profiling does not give to the supplier or to the customer any margin of efficiency gains. And smart meters also enable low voltage demand, of course in an aggregated way, to participate in all markets, not only in wholesale markets, but in reserve markets and in ancillary services markets. Now, in many countries, load aggregators are not possible, because there are some regulatory obstacles to that. When it comes to cost-benefit analysis, and we have seen several published in several countries, we must identify these costs and benefits, we must quantify them, and we must then assign these costs or the benefits to some categories of agents. Who are the concerned parties? Well, we have the consumers, the suppliers, the distribution network operator, the metering companies, and the public interest. And the introduction of smart metering potentially brings benefits to all these categories of stakeholders. So, to evaluate the benefits of smart metering, we should not only concentrate on the benefits for consumers, but we should include the benefits for suppliers, for network operators, and the public interest. When it comes to costs, we have not only the costs of the meters themselves, but the costs with the communication related with the meters, the infrastructure costs of the suppliers, and the infrastructure costs of the network operator. And again, we must add the costs of the consumers, the suppliers, the network operators to get the total costs. Now, the cost of the meters or the associated communications can be assigned to the consumers or to the suppliers or to the network operators. There are different legal and regulatory solutions in place. There is not a universal approach in this respect. So any cost-benefit analysis must weight these metering and communication costs and the processing costs with the benefits for consumers, suppliers, network operators, and the public interest. And in my view, what is very important is to ensure that we maximize these benefits, that whatever technical solution we choose, we make it possible to maximize the benefits for all these categories and not just for one or two. The smart metering makes a lot of new information available, and this enables market participants, namely consumers and suppliers, to invent new contractual arrangements, because today retail competition is based mainly on price. That's the way the suppliers can compete. But if we have smart metering, then, as we have seen, the suppliers will be able to aggregate demand and to participate in several markets, not only in the wholesale market, but in reserve markets or ancillary services markets. And if the customer is willing to accept some degree of intervention of the supplier in the demand management, then there may be huge benefits which will of course be shared between the supplier and the consumer. And here we have a lot of new opportunities to develop innovative pricing schemes, to develop competition between suppliers, and to create really truly integrated European market, also at retail level. Then we have opportunities and benefits for system and network operators. They can improve their overall efficiency, reliability, and quality of supply. And to do that, they need, of course, to build upon the smart metering infrastructure. They must move towards smart grids. And here again, we have lots of new business opportunities, both in terms of new hardware and new software, to reshape the way we manage our networks and our systems. Smart metering provides information which is also necessary for better regulation. This information will enable the regulatory authorities to introduce more efficient types of incentives of regulation, and this again opens the door to new opportunities, mainly in research. So we have to look at the whole thing, not only at the meters and replacement of the meters. We must look at the consumers and the fact that we must inform the consumers and raise the awareness of consumers about energy consumption. Then we have opportunities related to the transmission of the metering data through different types of communication networks, bringing this information to the consumers, to the suppliers, and to the network operators. And all of them will need new tools and new ways of interacting with the energy demand at home. And that's where we will see the development of new business opportunities, not only in metering, manufacturing, and maintenance, but in education, in services, in telecommunications, and then in all types of specific services and solutions at the consumers' houses, in the supplier's office, and in the control centers of the network operators. Finally, some recommendations. we are observing in Europe a lack of technical and regulatory harmonization. Several countries moving forward, but this could lead very quickly to a patchwork of national and sometimes even infranational solutions. Because we have this goal of creating one single European electricity market, we should avoid unnecessary extra costs and obstacles which reduce potential economies of scale. We should avoid the introduction of new technical barriers to the full integration of the EU electricity market. Some degree of harmonization does not mean that we should impose one single technological solution, because we know that there are many alternative technologies and technological solutions. We should allow for some competition at this technological level and give the customers and the suppliers the freedom to adopt different competing technologies, as long as they are compatible with the efficient functioning of an integrated European internal electricity market. So we need basically minimum functional requirements concerning the meters, but also the information needed for the network operators, not only the smart meters but also the smart grids. We must specify these requirements, emphasizing demand response capabilities and interoperability. We must then define also some technical standards and the procedures to review and update the standards related to meter design and to meter operation. And the European Commission is working together with the body responsible for standardization in Europe, Senelec, working on this. We need some targets, some clear timetables for the mandatory rollout of meters, and we must define the rules to access data by customers, suppliers and network operators in order to avoid any form of discrimination and keeping, of course, confidentiality as appropriate. Moreover, the EU should urgently adopt guidelines on the integration of demand response into market design, should facilitate load aggregation and participate of demand in the wholesale, reserve and ancillary services markets. And the Commission, the Union, should mandate transmission system operators to promote demand response. Today, demand response in Europe, in continental Europe, is less than 3% of peak load, which is a very low figure. As regards regulators, they should review those regulations that hinder the development of smart metering, for instance, the lack of cost-reflective time-of-use network tariffs, and should be active in promoting demand response. Finally, last recommendation, be aware of non-smart obstacles, because they are almost everywhere on our way to a more efficient and modern power system. That's the end of my presentation. Thanks for your patience, and I will be very glad now to ask any questions,